I am being watched. Welcome, everyone. This is going to be season 1, episode 6 of Person of Interest. It is called The Fix. And I think, first up, what's most interesting to me about this episode is that it's paired with the last episode. Is that for 2 in a row now, I feel like we've ended episodes with a character who might come back, who might be an ally or a friend to Reese and Finch in the future. Last week we had the judge who was very thankful that his son was saved, and that felt like a potential friend in the future. And then here we have someone who is a little more outside the law, but someone who very much is like kind of connected to the system, and that is a fixer. That is a character named Zoe Morgan, who Reese is trying to protect this episode, and we get to know about what she does, about how she makes deals with shady people to track down evidence, to keep people, one example in the episode is she gets like a gun that was left by a cop at a crime scene to help keep him, on the force and out of trouble and that kind of thing. And she's paid for that by people who are asking her to do those things. Cover up evidence of affairs, that sort of thing. But she's got a lot of contacts. She knows a lot of people in the city, a lot of important people in the city. And by the end of the episode, it feels like she's built up some camaraderie with Reese. And in fact, the last line she has in the episode is, "You've got my number." Now, when she says it, she's kind of saying it in case she gets in trouble. But, you can read between the lines, and it's like one day Reese might have to call that number. I do think it's interesting that we've had this in the last one back to back, because I think we're building potential allies in the future, and while not every character I think could be a potential returning character will be, I think if a handful of them are, like, I'll be quite satisfied that the allies that he's made because he's helped people, that'll feel quite fulfilling, I think, even before we get any to greater, larger storytelling, serialized stuff that's going to take place over a long time, which this episode also does a lot of with the B plot with Carter and what she's investigating. So we'll get into all that. So the main plot of this episode, like I said, is this woman named Zoe Morgan. I must say, I'm loving the variety of how we're starting these episodes and how Reese and Finch are like involved. Because the first few episodes, I think they all kind of started with, okay, who are we looking at? And it's like, okay, we'll start with John watching them and spying on them or whatever. I think this episode and last episode, and maybe the one before, like, there's been a few in a row now where they've started with like, oh, John and Finch have already got a plan sort of halfway in motion. In this case, he's masquerading as a driver, and they even sort of have some fun with it here when she calls to confirm that she's expecting a new driver, because Reese says that the regular guy got sick. She calls the company, and they don't show him, but we hear Finch's voice. We hear it's him talking to her, and explains that, oh no, the regular guy's sick from his kid, blah, blah, blah. And I'm enjoying that every episode, because it feels like they're having some fun with just like, okay, what different ways can we have them already inserted in the story? We've already established how resourceful Finch is with his research and, like, getting access to things. It's been kind of fun, I think the first one that was kind of really cool was Reese stepping in the elevator and, like, maybe episode 2 or 3, whatever one that was. And that was just like, oh, how is he going to pop up in the plot? And it happens quite quickly each episode, but like we're kind of like just having fun with just already kind of been in the person's life a little bit. And the viewer at the start of the episode gets to sort of like put the pieces together as they're unveiling them for a few minutes. And then we get into the meat of the plot of, okay, right, we know this is who we're protecting or possibly coming after as the culprit, but, after a few minutes, we'll start to get into, like, okay, why? What is their thing? What are they doing? And this, like, previous episode starts off with a red herring early on where she buys a gun and you think she's going to use it, because he's like, oh, she bought a gun on the street. That probably means that she's going to kill someone, especially when she already has another gun at home. She wants one that's untraceable. Finch is in there snooping around whilst Reese is being her driver. But it turns out she's retrieved this for a policeman because his nephew, who's like a rookie cop, needs to not be in trouble. So it's like, okay, fun little swerve. The only thing I'll say about it at this point is that, like, I'm expecting it to be a swerve. Like, not a single part of me thought she's actually going to try and kill someone. I would have been so shocked if she actually took a shot at someone. Like, I would have been absolutely gobsmacked because I was never expected it. So maybe there's a slight critique there that the early red herring of like what the person actually is doing or who they are, like that little like that first idea they get like is almost always been wrong. Maybe there's a in fact last week I guess that wasn't true with the judge, but they've done it enough times now that I just like I'm like she's not going to kill someone. There's more to it than it's more complex than that. That'd be too easy. It would almost be more satisfying if she had just went to kill someone. Which is not to say that I didn't like where the rest of the episode went. Far from it. But I'm critiquing that one little trick that they've used a few times now, where they're playing with our expectations of who, what the person is, and like try to give us like an obvious solution that is going to turn out quite quickly to not be true. It's quick enough that it didn't really bother me, and it's not like the situations aren't different enough that I'm still just kind of engrossed in finding out what's actually going on. But it's maybe a little critique that I think you could maybe levy at it at this point. You know, if you're going to argue that any part of it's formulaic, maybe that's the one element that feels like a little bit of a formula right now. Because otherwise, they've been doing a really good job of shaking up. Every episode's felt different. Like no episode's felt like he's doing a similar type of case. I don't think. It always feels like he's interacting with very different people. Here, the plot kind of revolves around the fact that she's getting this recording back of a. I don't know if it was actually meant to be a phone call or just a conversation in a room. I think it may have just been a conversation in a room. But this woman, which Finch and Reese assume that this guy that works at this big pharmaceutical company, he's the acting president effectively. He's going to be taking over for the current president when he retires soon, which is his father-in-law. And this guy, Lawson, he is seemingly covering up an affair with an employee. And it all goes off without a hitch until the guys who paid her to get this recording off some hacker dude, they try and kill her. And Reese kind of steps in immediately when that happens, and that kind of sends it spiraling down the course of the episode. But of course it is more complex than that. We find out that this is not an affair. She was actually going to blow the whistle on the company because they faked some, or they altered some data about trials to the FDA to get their new drug approved, this pill for headaches that apparently has a 3% mortality rate, which is a bit too high for mass market production. I think most people will agree. And they make that clear. They have Zoe say that at one point. She says, "Oh, if 1 million people take this, like 30,000 will die." Just in case you didn't quite get how severe 3% was in the context of like a lot of people. That is a lot. So, okay, right. So we've got this sort of noble thing to stop. Right, that's all good. Gives us a goal. Gives us some villains to hate. They play as a little bit, here or there, thinking it's just the son-in-law and he's trying to cover up so his father-in-law won't find out. But then ultimately we find out that the father-in-law is just as evil and he knows about it and he's like, telling him to cover it up. And he's the real villain behind this. All of this is it's all fine. I think Reese working with Zoe, breaking into the pharmaceutical building to get the information at one point is also fine. It's all perfectly good stuff without being, I would say, as compelling, say, as his interactions with some other characters. I think the episode a couple ago where he was with the woman who was trying to avenge her sister. I think there was more emotional connection for me with that relationship versus this one, and a bit more heart and soul to it. But there is something to be said, though, that this is a character, Zoe, who is morally a lot more grey. She's kind of cold and disconnected and tries not to let morals get in the way. She's very much, I always want a way out of a situation. I always want to have something that I can trade or make a deal with for my benefit. She never wants to be caught in the corner, and she's not very trusting. In fact, the very opening thing she says in this episode, or even does, I should say, is double check that Reese isn't lying about who he says he is. And then from there, tells him not to pay attention, not to look, not to ask questions, to shut up. She's very disconnected. And I suppose that's the real sort of counterpoint to the judge last week, is that this is a character who the judge was very morally by the book, right? That's everything we heard about him, is that he was a strict judge who believed in the law and tried to enforce it the best he could with his position. This is a character who is out for herself and will screw over and make sure she's never caught with her pants down effectively with anyone else. But by the end of the episode, maybe Reese's influence has made her a slightly better person, right? And not in the same way as the avenging sister from 2 episodes ago either, because she was a good person who just had this one, bad thing, but one bad person she wanted to take out. But she was otherwise a very good and noble person. She was this dedicated doctor who wanted to save people. This is a character who is out for herself. She is the antithesis to those last 2 characters that Reese helped. But by the end, maybe he's inspired some good in her. And, the fact that he may have created an ally in someone who, at the start of the episode, would probably not help someone in need. She would probably keep herself out of it just because she wouldn't want to get caught up in it, because she wouldn't she wouldn't gain anything from it. She wouldn't benefit from it, and it might put her in danger, so she would stay out of it. But maybe she'll take a risk for Reese now. Maybe she'll do that because it's something good. And they even sort of joke about that at the end of the episode, where Reese asks, when did you decide to do the right thing? And she's like, 2 seconds before I gave you the paperclip so you could get out the handcuffs, which they set up. She was commenting on his lockpicking skills earlier, so she knew he could use that. And that's all good. But that's playing with the idea that it was a split-second thing. It wasn't this big change that she was going through over the course of the episode. She was just inspired enough by that point to want to do the right thing. And she was playing like she was going to do the wrong thing, but was trying to get her gang friends to help her at the end. Because at the start of the episode, she goes to meet with this guy on a bridge at the pier to get the gun for the cop. And at the end of the episode, she takes Lawson, the rich pharmaceutical guy, she takes him to that same location. The idea being that these are actually friends that might help her if she looks like she's in trouble. It turns out Reese shows up anyway, and just in the nick of time, of course. But I should mention here that Reese, when he's handcuffed and he's about to be murdered by the bodyguard dude that works for Lawson, he's like, oh, this is the stuff they use in state executions. It stops your heart in a few minutes. It's quite humane. And Reese hits us with one of his one-liners. He's like, that's fortunate for you. And what do you mean by that? I might be slightly misphrasing that, but that was the sentiment behind it. That's good for you was basically what he said. And obviously he fights him and stabs him with a syringe. I will say, I was a little disappointed that the guy just seemingly died after he gets stabbed. I guess he just got stabbed in a place that, would have killed him anyway, regardless of what was in the syringe. But I kind of like the idea of Reese walking away from the scene and the guy still sitting there alive, knowing that he was going to be dead within minutes, and he didn't really have the will to fight anymore. I thought that would have been a sort of darkly kind of funny scene, because he's a bad guy. I'm not saying I'd like that for anyone, but for him specifically, that seemed like it might be a fun little way to end. But he just kind of dies instantly. But given what they just set up in the dialogue, I thought it would have been cool if he was actually sitting there alive. Now, what I've been avoiding talking about up until this point, of course, is Finch. And probably the best thing about this episode is Finch's personal involvement and connection to the case. So he doesn't know, this woman personally. He doesn't really know much about the company or anything like that. He's not tied to it in that sense, but he's tied to this in the sense that this recording of this woman that was killed before. Remember, they thought it was an affair that they were covering up, but it turned out to not be an affair. She was going to blow the whistle on this company for falsifying stuff for the FDA and putting people in danger, and they had her killed for it. It turns out, once they realize who this person is and that she was killed, that this was actually someone that Finch got before he met Reese. He got her number before the start of the show, before he had Reese to step in and save people. So we've heard before that he's been haunted and he's felt guilty about all these numbers that led to deaths that he couldn't do anything about. So this is a sort of personal connection that's not just personal, but it's personal in a way that directly ties to the premise of the show and the backstory of the entire premise of the show. And I think that's that makes it feel quite important from a character beat, is that he gets to sort of like get justice for one of those, and he takes a personal investment in this. He says that he's got a business meeting because he's made a big investment, and we cut to the pharmaceutical company, and I think most viewers will get right away that he's about to walk in. He's about to be the guy in this scene, and they build it up for a few minutes in dialogue, so it's really obvious by the time he actually does walk in. But he uses, his cane quite heavily here. He sort of like overemphasizes his weakness to put them at ease, like they're so that they feel more powerful. Which really sticks out at the very last scene with him and the old rich president dude of the company, because when he leaves that scene, he leaves just holding the cane. Because we see Finch walking about all the time. He does have the limp, of course, but he does walk without a cane pretty much all the time. I don't even know if I've seen him with a cane before. Maybe briefly, but typically he just walks about with a limp. And he walks out of that restaurant at the end of the episode holding the cane, and it's like, oh, I don't have to pretend and make myself seem more weak for the purpose of the case anymore. I can just, and he gets to have catharsis. He gets to have this closing full stop where he tells the old guy, like, I'm going to financially cripple your company with what I've done with your stocks. And he puts a photo of the murdered employee in front of him, the woman they had killed, and makes it clear that your company's about to crash and burn because there's going to be a serious legal investigation, and walks out. And I think it works quite well, and obviously it's this personal like connection he has to it that inspires him to get more directly involved, to where he goes as an investor and a stock buyer to the company, and leaves like a watch as a present, which is obviously there to bug the room and listen to their conversations. And he directly tries to phone the bad guy and intervene when he thinks Reese is in trouble at one point. Like, he gets really hands-on in this episode, and he's been surprisingly hands-on, I would say, for most of the episodes, but this one, it felt like he was really getting in there, and he took a victory lap, and not in a way that it felt gloaty, but I think it was important to him that he got this. And there's even a moment with Reese where he's just right after he's told Reese, this means something to me because we can avenge one of these numbers. We can do something about one of these people and stop them from making any more numbers from the machine. And he sort of criticizes Reese and says, "Hey, try not to lose the Zoe again, because they've lost her at this point in the episode. She ran off in the middle." And Reese just has a little smirk because even though he's just been told off, he realizes that this means something to Finch, and that Finch is showing that he cares about it in a way that he doesn't usually do. So and that's something that has more meaning because we know how closed off Finch is with Reese, but Reese is getting to know him anyway. So those little moments where it could read as a cold, negative encounter between them end up feeling quite warm because it's actually Finch opening up and revealing something, even if he's doing it in a moment of not anger, but like he's chastising him basically. So like I thought that little moment did a lot, and him getting to redeem one of those numbers from before he met Reese was a really fun idea, that it makes sense that one of these would eventually tie back into one of them. He's got that wall full of just hundreds of these things from before he met Reese. It's not surprising that one at some point did eventually come up again in some way. I appreciate, now this is another example of them using like a recording of a voice at the start of the episode. They did it with the sister episode, the doctor lady, a couple ago, where you kept hearing part of her like final message throughout the episode. They didn't do it as much here, but you heard it at the start before they played the recording later, and it's very ominous just to hear this kind of emotional like phone call or conversation through a recording. I will say Finch does do something in this episode that did make me give him a bit of a side eye, in terms not from like a character perspective, just from like a technology perspective. He clears up the recording because when he gets samples of the ambient noise, the room noise from where the recording was made, he's able to like use that to take it out of the original recording and hear the voice better. Now, maybe that's a real thing, right? Maybe it is, right? There's all sorts of crazy things, especially even, since this episode came out over a decade ago. But as someone who has worked with audio recordings and had to deal with bad audio recordings and all those kinds of things through just university and things like that. This sounded kind of like bullshit to me. It didn't sound like a real thing. Now, it wouldn't shock me if by this point with AI and everything else, but you can't really subtract audio as far as I've been taught. You do, like, what's funny is that when you do record audio for a scene, for a TV show, or even just an interview, even with like for a documentary, you're always taught to record room audio to get some ambient noise for like a minute, just so that if you have to cut the things up and there's inconsistencies, you can put in the ambient room noise and it'll sound more consistent because you're sort of like bridging all the little gaps in the edits and the pauses and things like that. So it does have a purpose. There's a reason to do it. But certainly, like it's at least in this time period, which was just before I went to university, actually, when this aired. Over the next 4 years after this episode, I can tell you that this technology was not available to university students, and I'm skeptical if it existed at all. Maybe someone will tell me otherwise, but it sounded like a made-up TV thing. And usually I don't really harp on those unless they're really obvious, but it's just because in this case, I've actually done some work with this kind of thing, and trying to like make bad audio sound better, that this sounded particularly egregious to me. But it's only because I've worked with stuff. I mean, not this exact type of thing, but so I don't know. Something worth mentioning a little bit. But yeah, so no, solid episode. I think, like, I'm not finished yet. I've still got the Carter stuff to talk about, but solid episode. The main story in the sense that I think I've enjoyed pretty much every episode up until this point. I think they've done a good job of making them feel different, having different types of people that he interacts with, having different lessons that either he learns or his influence has on the person each episode. There's been a nice varied amount of that. So there's no Fusco this episode, it's just Carter. And when we go to her in this episode, she's at a murder scene, which is unrelated to the episode, like the main story. It's just its own thing. But it does have a connection, it turns out. So she's at the crime scene. It's this old man who's been stabbed with a knife, and she's looking through this guy's history because it turns out he's like a heavy for like the mob or something like that. He's some guy with a really, really detailed police history, and it turns out that he was a suspect in a murder case from the 70s, and there's a connection to something that's already happened. It turns out that this knife was the one that was stolen from evidence back in like episode 3. I want to say that was, the one where they went to the evidence locker and stole something. And the end of that episode, whoever wanted this evidence to be stolen killed the guy who, ran that group of thieves that would steal stuff for him. So that sort of was hinting at a more ongoing villain, an ongoing story beat. And this was the first time it's came back up again, really. And so it's like, okay, whoever got that evidence has now used that knife to kill someone, possibly in retaliation, because this is the same knife that this guy used to kill this woman in the 70s. And the most obvious suspect by the end of the episode, although it's probably not him, would be that this woman had a son who was quite young. When this murder happened, he would be, an adult now. In fact, he'd be probably in his mid to late 40s at this point in 2011. But that's like the obvious outcome. What's interesting though is that Carter talks to the detective who worked on the case in the 70s, and who is it but Carla's husband from Cheers, who comes in and helps out Carter, Nick Tortelli, who I also just recently saw him again a couple of months ago. I always forget he's in Alien Resurrection. He's in that too. He's one of those faces that pops up. I had no idea he was still working into the 2010s, and he's apparently got credits all the way up to 2021, so good for him. But that was like a weird, pleasant surprise, and not someone I expected to just come into Person of Interest. But that was fun. But he actually ends up dead by the end of the episode, sadly. Whoever did this kills him at the end. When Carter goes to get evidence of him, that he's found that maybe links the son to this woman that took care of him. He's lying there dead, and Carter chases the suspect out. We don't get a good look at them, but she does seem to hit the perp with a bullet, and there's some blood left on the door frames, so that'll probably lead to some evidence. I mean, it's hard to have much to say about this yet, because there's not really any concrete details to analyze from a character perspective, other than this does feel kind of one and done to an extent, and that feels almost like that itself is kind of a red herring, because it feels like, okay, someone really cared about the fact that this woman was murdered and that no justice was found because things were so corrupt at the time. That's what the old detective says. He says that the judge was paid for, so it was all corrupt, and there was never a verdict or a guilty verdict or whatever. And if it is the son, that would imply that the son wanted this evidence just for the purpose of getting revenge, and this would be the end of it. Like, as far as we would know, there'd been nothing else for him to want to do. And it feels like this ongoing plot of whoever was hiring those thieves to get that evidence, that seems like more of a longer storytelling idea. That feels like someone we're going to build up to. So if I was to make a guess right now, I would say that maybe it is the son who murdered the guy who killed his mum, but I don't necessarily think he's the one who hired the thieves to get the evidence. If anything, I would guess that the person who hired the thieves and then killed the leader of the thieves is someone who is effectively the person that we're building up to, but is like this middleman, a fixer almost, much like and maybe that's why it's in this episode. It's sort of a secret thematic link, is that this is like a villainous fixer who is retrieving things for people so they can act out revenge. So it's almost like an anti Reese and Finch in a way. It's someone who's stepping in to help people not necessarily do bad things, because it is like revenge on a murderer, but stuff that's a bit more morally grey and on the less lawful side. not the Reese and Finch are operating within the law by any means, but you know what I mean. If Reese and Finch, if I compare them to Batman a lot, then whoever this is more like, I don't know, the Punisher, or someone who's willing to let people kill people. Basically, I don't know. That would be my guess. That would be my guess for how it builds up to someone because I suspect there might be other things that tie into that plot that feel disconnected maybe, and then that's how they're all connected, is that there's someone kind of helping lots of different people get their revenge or whatever. That said, though, if this person running away at the end of the episode is just the person who did all that, including paid off the thieves back in episode 3, then I'd be wrong in that case. But I'm suspecting that this person's different, or at the very least maybe this person who came in to clear up this loose end at the end of the episode that Carter almost shot is the mastermind behind all this stuff, but that they didn't personally kill the other person, perhaps. Maybe that was just the son, but it's the mastermind who was smart enough to know there'd be a loose end and went to try and solve that. I don't know if what I said made any sense or was easy to follow, but it works in my head. I know what I'm saying. But that would be my guess as of right now. Unless... actually, no, there's actually a simpler explanation now that I'm thinking about it. It's not the son. It was never the son who murdered the guy who killed the wife, right? It's not him. It's just the mastermind, who is still the opposite of Finch and Reese in that they're just tracking down people who deserve to be killed and killing them with things that are personal, not to them themselves. They're just out. They're like an avenging angel, effectively, right? They think they're doing the justice that left gone. They're like a Punisher type character, but they go out of their way to make sure each act of vengeance on the behalf of someone else has a personal touch. So in this case, it's the knife that actually committed the original crime. Maybe in another case, they'd leave a photo of someone's victim or something next to the perpetrator that they've gunned down, or whatever. Yeah, that's actually less complicated. Is that it's just this avenging angel character who's going around killing people who are guilty of things, but it's more in cold blood as opposed to what Reese and Finch do, and that kind of makes them the anti Reese Finch, the Bat team, the Batman, the Bat. I'm losing it. I don't know how to describe them anymore. I've said Finch and Reese so many times the words are starting to merge together and it doesn't make any sense. All right, I think I'm done with the fix. I think that wraps up the episode. Solid, good. I probably like the last two a bit more. If I'm comparing episodes and I'm saying which one's hit a bit harder for me, I think the last two were just a little bit better than this one, but that's not because this one's bad. It's just because I think those were just a step up in what they were doing. This one's still pretty good. It's still different. It's still dealing with a different type of character and advancing and building the overall world that we're in with these characters in New York. So there you go. That's episode 6. I will see you next time for episode 7. So thank you very much for joining me. You can, of course, support all the content and help keep it coming by going over to patreon.com/MailFuzzTV and supporting over there for however much you can afford per month. But that is the show. So thank you once again for watching or listening. I always appreciate it. Keep watching TV. Have you got any vanilla?